And I am live. Sorry for the delay. I don't know what happened. I had to do a bit of a reboot. I had it started and then it wouldn't go live. But anyway, leaving all that aside, it's Gordon Causey, February 8th. Now 11:32, I actually hit the go live button at 11:29 and then it wouldn't start. Anyway, again, Gordon Causey, live and unscripted on this Saturday, February 8th. Yep, that's right. 11. Now it's 11:33 p.m. Candy the Wonder Pup is here pawing all over me because I have one of her favorite bacon treats. Yeah. Okay, let me get it out of the pocket. I have to put it in a pocket up here because if I put it down there, she sticks her nose right in my pocket. Lay down. Speak. Speak. Come on up. Man, I got to trim her nails. I see I have whale oil is here already, as is Danny. Cheers, my friends, and anyone else. I see there are others here as well. As always, fill up the live chat. Anyone stumbling onto my station for the first time, Gordon Causey, 58-year-old Canadian, ex-military, uh, injecting his voice into the public discourse, putting forth my thoughts, my views, my ideas, my opinions, and ultimately what I would most most want to see, or what my I enjoy discussion. I enjoy broadening my horizons. I like uh, hearing different points of view, and ultimately, I think the best situation is where we discuss the ideas. I think there's a tendency in our world today to want to shortcut things and to say, why should I listen to this person if they put an idea out? There's just so much information in the public marketplace that I want shortcuts, and so that uh, people, what they do is they follow specific individuals and then they parrot back whatever ideas they're putting forth because this person, this guy who has this XYZ experience, he put forth the idea and he's smart, so it must be a good idea because it's coming from a smart person. What I prefer is when the ideas themselves are discussed in isolation, irrespective of what the originating source is. Man, that's an unwieldy, convoluted opening to a video, but whatever, that's what I do. Uh, Danny has written down bacon strips. Candy goes absolutely ballistic over those bacon strips. Danny always writes that he's got his coffee, ready to go, a ticket. He's got his Bible. I'm a Bible believing, professing Christian, and so uh, I too have my coffee. Got to keep my voice somewhat, even though coffee is a diuretic. Uh, for whatever reason, it's liquid and it does lubricate the old vocal cords. Man, so much happening in the world right now. There's tons of news out there. What 6:30 this evening, roughly? I guess that would be local time in the Eastern time zone. Somewhere off the coast of the Cayman Islands, there was in the Caribbean Sea a massive. I don't think it's 7.6 is a large earthquake. As I remember, as I recall, the and I forget what year it was. It was the year in the 80s when the Oakland Athletics were playing against the San Francisco Giants in the World Series. They called it the Bay Area Series. There was a massive earthquake in that area, in the Bay Area. And if memory serves, without going back and checking, that was a magnitude 6.9, right around 7. And it caused extensive damage. There was a a suspended highway, like the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto, one of these suspended roads, and part of it collapsed, crushing drivers, massive destruction. And this earthquake in the Caribbean Sea off the coast of the Cayman Islands initially had a measurement of 8.0, and it has since been ratcheted down a bit to 7.6. And my understanding of the Richter scale is that Each full point represents a 10 times increased level of movement. So that is to say, if you have a 6.0 magnitude earthquake, 7 is 10 times greater than 6, and 8 is 10 times greater than 7, and so on and so on. And so 7.6 is significant, more than significant. And there are, for Cuba, for Puerto Rico, there are tsunami warnings because this happened off the coast. It happened at a depth. I don't know how underneath the Earth's surface, underneath the ocean floor. You have these tectonic plates, whatever. I'm not a geologist, but a major slip happens that causes the earthquake, and then there's fear of a tsunami, a tidal wave, and we'll see what happens. Cuba and Puerto Rico and maybe other places as well, possibly Jamaica. There are warnings of the potential for tsunamis. This is on top of all the seismic activity that's been occurring in the Aegean Sea off the Greek islands, principally around an island called Santorini, which was the rough location of a about 3,500 years ago. There was a major eruption that destroyed, decimated, wiped out the Minoan civilization. I think that may be where Pompeii is. I'm not 100% sure, where people were frozen in situ, basically. So lots happening seismically around the world. I've been fixating somewhat on Santorini and wondering what's happening there. Didn't hear any warnings about potential for an earthquake in the Caribbean, and then bang, it hits just this very evening. And then we have news of another air crash that has happened within the last couple of days up in Alaska, where a small commuter jet aircraft, or I don't know whether it's a jet or probably prop, it only carried 9 passengers and the pilot, and it was lost off radar. They've now located it on quote unquote sea ice, and all 10 people, the 9 passengers and the pilot, all dead, all deceased. And so within the last week or so, there we've got Washington D.C., we've got the Washington D.C. Black Hawk and commuter aircraft flying into Reagan National Airport via Wichita, Kansas. So there's that one. Then there was the Fireball Learjet in Philadelphia, that massive fireball explosion, and now we have this small passenger aircraft, 9 people on board in Alaska. There was a less significant event down in Houston, Texas, where a plane just getting ready to take off, where they had engine troubles and the wing caught fire. And an even smaller event at Chicago's O'Hare, where an individual tugging or towing an aircraft had their towing vehicle struck by another aircraft, by the wing of another aircraft, knocking this towing vehicle over and pinning the operator inside. I have Danny correcting me that Pompeii, that was the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Fair enough. The one thing I know about the Santorini explosion, the one that wiped out the Minoan civilization, which obviously isn't Pompeii, that one happened about 1,500 years BC, and it coincides roughly. It's in the same time period, roughly, as the biblical Exodus, when the Israelites were being led out of bondage by Moses. It's in that same time frame. And there has been speculation that the events of that the Santorini volcanic explosion, that it may have been exactly coinciding with the Exodus, and that the seismic events, tsunamis, ash cloud, and all these things could provide something of an explanation for the plagues as recounted in the Bible in Exodus, as well as in these same plagues or these same events are echoed into extra biblical documents, documents outside the Bible. One is the famous Ipawar papyrus, and then there's another stela, which is a massive stone monument with etchings on it, something like a massive gravestone, if you like. Massive big stone that has hieroglyphic writings on it. And this stela describes events again that echo what is in Exodus and what's in the Ipawar papyrus. And it all happened at a time of the expulsion or the exodus of a large group of Semitic peoples known as the Hyksos. It's called the Hyksos expulsion. You can look it up. Hyksos, I believe, is spelled in English, it's rendered Hykos. So lots happening in the world. Obviously, there's still the aftershocks of Donald Trump's announcement about taking over, assuming ownership of the Gaza Strip, and convincing neighboring Arab states to take in Palestinians either temporarily or permanently so that reconstruction efforts can move forward and rehabilitate this devastated little tiny strip of land. I think it's about 5 miles long, 3 miles wide. Very, very, it's a heaping, it's a smoldering pile of rubble right now with no infrastructure, no services, no electricity, no water treatment, no anything. People going to be living in buildings that are, threatening to collapse with all kinds of unexploded ordnance around. Who knows? And then you have the Canadian political situation where Mark Carney, which is more or less the subject of my video, is poised to become Canada's next prime minister. For those not paying attention or only paying attention, here we go. We got Danny telling me he's looked it up. The Gaza Strip is 41 kilometers or 25 miles long. Okay, so I really shortened it. It's 25 miles long. And the distance across, the width, if you will, is between 6 and 12 wide. So it has a total area of 141 square miles, 365 square kilometers. Thank you, Danny. Danny's amazing. Because so much of this stuff that I talk about, I'm talking off the top of my head, live and unscripted. And man, I was way off on the top to bottom size of Gaza, but not that far off, 3 to 7.5 miles wide. So it's a lot longer than it is wide. And the situation in Canada, though, with Mark Carney, this is taking on new significance because polling is indicating that the Liberals have been, at least in terms of the polling numbers, they've shot up from in and around 20%, roughly, to up in and around 30%, a massive jump, a 33% increase in their level of support within just the last week or two. I've got Whale Oil Beef saying that either way, Gaza is mostly undeveloped oceanfront properties. That's what it is right now. And it needs to be bulldozed. The biggest question I have is about all that unexploded ordnance. There's all the rockets, drones, missiles, the armaments that Hamas had that they were unable to use, that have been they're buried under the ground now. They had it down in these terror tunnels, and with the bombardment they received from the IDF, that a lot of that stuff still has to be underground. And then I have to assume that bombs don't always go off. Israel will drop their own missiles, their own rockets into Gaza, trying to wipe out Hamas, but not everything goes off. So there could be unexploded Israeli ordnance there as well. And the place is just one giant booby trap almost. And talk about a massive reconstruction project, although I'm sure the money is there to redevelop it, but the developers, they operate on the profit motive. They'll want to go in and build resort hotels and what have you, and they expect a return on their investment. And what does that mean for the people of Gaza if they leave and after the reconstruction takes place, they have to be allowed the right to return. At least that's my understanding of international law conventions, is that they would have to have the opportunity to return. And then the question becomes, the Gaza Strip, it is the sovereign territory of which nation? Does it become a territory of the United States of America, a la Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands? Or does Israel take it over? Or this fantastical notion of the two-state solution, do they somehow join it with the western bank of the Jordan River, what's now the Israeli territory of Judea Samaria? Is Israel going to be convinced to give up their Judean Samarian territory and join it up with Gaza? I don't think that could happen, but uh, at any rate, let's get on to the Canadian situation. Justin Trudeau, who's soon to be the outgoing Prime Minister of Canada, has been in the press lately in the last 48 hours, stating that Trump's musings about Canada becoming the 41st state are genuine and real, and that he genuinely does want to take over the United States of America, or rather, that he wants the United States of America to take over Canada, that he has designs on our mineral assets, especially in the north, in the Arctic. I was talking about that yesterday with, the Franklin's expeditions to chart a Northwest Passage through, Canada's high Arctic and out to the Bering Strait and then into the Pacific, looking for a shortcut to the Far East, to places like China and India. And there are a lot of commentators saying right now that Canada has done precious little to establish ownership and governorship of the high Arctic. And with, climate changing, and I never deny, I'm not a climate change denier to the extent that, does climate change? Yes, climate has always changed. I am a denier, or I question the degree to which human activity impacts climate change. But there's no questioning the fact that climate does change, and things are getting warmer. They certainly have over the course of my lifetime. And assuming this trend continues, and typically these cyclical patterns of global warming and global cooling, from everything I've read, they last in and around 400 years. And we're about halfway in to what is a warming period. So we may have another 200 years yet to go. So as the planet warms, oil, natural gas, goodness knows how many minerals are up in our high Arctic. I've got No Name Nobody Man. I'm just going to call you No Name. That's too many syllables. No Name says, "The wind blows." I don't know what you're referencing, No Name, but all good. Appreciate you coming on the live and joining in. You're welcome to fill up the live chat like Danny and Whale Oil and everyone else who, types away. I appreciate it. I like the engagement. And so there has been a distinct rise in Canadian nationalism. And for better or for worse, whether it's accurate or not, Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of Canada's Conservative Party, is seen as being much more ideologically aligned with with Donald Trump. He's seen as being somewhat, at least somewhat, simpatico. I'm not saying he is, but I'm saying that is the general perception. People perceive that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are ideologically aligned with Donald Trump's Republican leadership of the United States of America. And I think that goes a long way to explaining the rise in the polls for the Liberal Party of Canada. Interestingly, the Conservatives, though, they're not seeing an erosion of their support. They're still hovering, punching up in and around 40% of support in the next election that we're going to have. They're still punching in and around 40%, which is where they were before. What is happening is the the left side of the spectrum, support on the left side is coalescing around the liberals. And why is this happening? I thought everyone hated the liberals. We hated the carbon tax. We hated their management of the economy. We hated this whole woke left liberal ideology. Why is everyone coalescing around the liberal party? And I'm here to offer an answer, what I believe is the reason. And it's because people hated Trudeau. They hated Justin Trudeau. And now Trudeau is going to be gone. He is going to be replaced on March 9th. They're having the Liberal leadership. I don't know exactly how it's being conducted. I'm not a member of the Liberal Party, surprise, surprise, but I'm also not a member of any other party for what it's worth. Um, uh, oh gosh, I've got No Name writing before global warming, and then which was rebranded as climate change, that we had, there's a hole in the ozone layer. We're all going to die. Cover yourself in chemicals, in, you know, sunscreen. Cover yourself in these chemicals from Coppertone and everyone else to protect yourself from the big bad boogeyman of the sun. And then Danny's writing that the ozone layer apparently fixed itself. No Name's writing, those were the days, and you know who you were then. Oh, boys were boys and men were men. Always, you're singing the old song from All in the Family. G.R. Old LaSalle ran great. When I was a kid listening to that, I never knew what they were saying. Our old LaSalle ran great. I thought it was like a Latin expression, the way they said, G.R. Old LaSalle ran great. Sounded like a foreign language to me when I used to listen to it. Uh, uh, and then Whale Oil's writing to No Name, nobody man, right? Oh man, what a time! What a time! What times we are living in. So what's happened is the left side of the political spectrum in Canada is somewhat coalescing around the Liberal Party, and the expectation far and wide is that Mark Carney is going to win the leadership. It's within the last month I put out a video and I said introducing Mark Carney, Canada's next prime minister, and it's a slam dunk. This is not a leadership race. This is a coronation. And I made the point before, and it's not an original thought of my own. Many people much smarter than I have made the point that Canadians, that we don't elect governments so much as we kick governments out. It's not that we embraced Trudeau in 2015, it was that Canadians by and large were tired of Stephen Harper. And likewise, we didn't embrace Stephen Harper. It was just that Canadians were tired of the corruption of the Liberal Martin era. So we were kicking the Chrétien Martin era Liberals out and embracing and you can go back when we elected, conservative Brian Mulroney back around 1985, 86. It wasn't that we were embracing Brian Mulroney and the Conservatives back then. It was that we were sick of having been ruled by the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Liberals for roughly 16 years. And now what's happened is with Trudeau leaving, everyone's like, oh, yay, Trudeau's leaving. I can consider voting Liberal again. And most Canadians are not paying hyper close attention to the political scene. And so they're largely unaware that Mark Carney has already been an advisor to the Liberal government that has brought in these disastrous policies around carbon tax and is all part of this woke liberal left agenda that doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman or a boy and a girl. They're just happy. The news, the media, the nightly programming is that Pierre Poilievre, he's untested, untried. He might be a little on the extreme side. And people respond to the programming that they receive from the nightly news. And actually, I've come across these people. I've mentioned many times. I work in a retail environment now after having left the Army because I refused to roll up my sleeve, to cede my bodily autonomy, and to take a rushed medical intervention that I wasn't confident was either efficacious or safe. which I feel largely, almost, basically, I feel totally vindicated on that decision. Let me read what's being written. No Name is writing, will he have to win a seat as an MP? Does he have to? No, he doesn't have to. However, there has never been a prime minister prime minister of Canada who has not held a seat. When Brian Mulroney became leader of the Conservatives, they were in opposition, and he was leader of the party but didn't have a seat in the House of Commons. And then typically what happens is in a case like that is the individual then someone in their party in a safe riding, in a riding that they're almost guaranteed to win, will step aside and the leader will run in a by-election to facilitate their entry into the House of Commons. I don't know that there has ever been a situation where the governing party has had its leader resign and then had a new leader elected that was not a sitting member. When maybe. I think it did happen. I think it did happen with John Turner. John Turner took over from Pierre Elliott Trudeau in around 1984. I'll have to read up on this. John Turner took over from Pierre Elliott Trudeau, vacated the leadership of the Liberal Party. They had a leadership convention. It was won by John Turner, but John Turner was not a sitting member, and he became the prime minister by virtue of the fact that he was now the leader of the largest party in the House of Commons, but he did not have a seat. And so what happened, and I even remember the riding, back then it was called Vancouver Quadra, and a Liberal member stepped aside and John Turner ran in a by-election, won the seat, and then he was the prime minister. But within 2-3 months, he called the federal election and he got destroyed by the Conservatives. So it has happened. He will be running in the upcoming federal election whenever it takes place, and I think it's going to take place sooner rather than later. I don't think it's going to be very long after that March 9th leadership coronation. Mark Carney will be coronated as leader, Chrystia Freeland, and all the rest. They don't have a chance. They don't have a snowball's chance in Hades. They'll coronate him. And then I expect very soon thereafter, there will be a federal election called in Canada. We'll probably be going to the polls sometime in April. That would be my guess. That's my prediction. We're going to be going to the polls June, early June at the very latest. And at that point, Mark Carney will be running for a seat, I assume, somewhere in downtown Toronto that is fairly safe Liberal territory. But anyway, so yeah, he will be running, and in all likelihood, he will win his seat. If the Liberals were to win and Mark Carney was to lose his seat, I don't see that happening. But if it were to happen, then he's still the prime minister, but he wouldn't have a seat in the House of Commons. He would occupy the prime minister's office, and then they would look to have some member of the Liberal Party in a safe seat resign, and then he would run in a by-election. But that's getting it way ahead of ourselves. Then Danny's writing, changing the leader does not change the party. That, to a degree, I think it does. It does change. The prime minister in this country now has so much power, similar to in the United States, with all the executive orders being signed by Donald Trump, and before him, Biden used that same mechanism, executive orders. And in Canada, we have something called orders in council. And they're very similar to an executive order, where it allows the prime minister's office to basically enact policies and procedures without parliamentary oversight. So, under the guise of, this is an emergency situation, this is urgent, this is something that needs to be acted on right away so we can have an order in council. But like in the United States, that can be challenged. In the United States, you've had one of the ones Trump wants to end what they call birthright citizens. Someone, comes on vacation to the United States and then has a baby, and the baby is automatically has automatic American citizenship conferred on them. This is this concept. They call them anchor babies because it's contended that parents do this intentionally, knowing that the birth date is coming. They come into the United States, give birth, and now they have an anchor, and they will be allowed to remain in the United States. The hope is based on compassionate grounds. Well, our child's an American citizen and we're the parents, so you got to let us stay. And Trump has wanted to end birthright citizenship, and he signed an executive order, but the courts have said, no, you're not allowed to do that. That contravenes the Constitution, specifically the 14th Amendment, yada yada, and then you get into a whole rabbit hole about the 14th Amendment, why it was brought in after the Civil War, and the need to ensure that Black Americans, my battery is running low, Black Americans were not disenfranchised, that they were ensured to have citizenship rights in the United States. There we go. I'm plugged in. So let's see what's being written. Whale Oil Beef is writing, an oath to the King's Privy Council will not occur until Carney is appointed Prime Minister. No Name is bringing up Joe Clark too. Joe Clark, when he became Prime Minister, and I think that was in the 1979 federal election, he ran as an MP in Calgary and was elected to his seat. So anyway, boom, boom, boom. Danny's writing, none of us who chose not to take the jab regret. No, there's not a single person I've ever met who's refused the COVID jab that regrets having, I wish I'd gotten that thing. The winter of death that we kept being warned about that turned out to be, don't want to go down that road too far. Danny's writing about, what about King Campbell's brief stint as PM? Yeah, likewise. And this would have been sometime around 1988. Brian Mulroney stepped aside as the Conservatives were the governing party, large majority. But Kim Campbell was a sitting member of the Conservative government. She was she was one of his cabinet ministers, and if I'm not mistaken, Minister of Finance. And she was actually his choice, so to speak, as his replacement. He had endorsed her, or at least promoted her as the next leader, and the party chose her. And then, so she became prime minister for a very short time, called an election, and then the Conservatives were wiped out. They only elected 2 members in the election that followed. That was during the time of the rise of Preston Manning's Reform Party, and they basically replaced the Conservatives as Canada's conservative-minded party. And they elected they became the official opposition, but all their members were from Western Canada. I don't think they ever elected a single member, Reform. I don't think they ever elected a single member east of the Ontario-Manitoba border. Their seats were from Manitoba West, and in the elections that followed, the Conservatives being wiped out under Kim Campbell, Joe Clark retook the leadership of the Conservatives, and the Conservatives would elect some members in Eastern Canada, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes, and it was all Reform in the West. And basically what it did is it allowed the Liberals under Jean Chrétien to win 3 massive majorities in a row, because the conservative, rightward-leaning voting public in Canada was split. Some were voting Conservative, some were voting Reform, and Reform later rebranded their party as the Canadian Alliance, got a new leader, Stockwell Day, got Canadian history. Let's see, No Name's writing, I figure Carney was selected already when he did the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Absolutely. He's not doing any real campaigning to speak of. He's not doing any town halls. He's running very much of a, I guess you would call it maybe a shadow campaign, where He's got a very friendly media machine that's promoting him. He's getting on the Daily Show, as noted, where he performed very well, very well. The knocks on him were that he was very cardboard cutout, not very personable, just very wooden. And then he goes on the Daily Show and he performs very well. But on a show like that, man, easy. He's being lobbed softball questions. Who knows? No, that wasn't a good take. Let's do it again. I don't know. I'm not saying that did happen, but I'm not discounting the possibility that something like that would happen, where they want to show him in the best possible light, because he's being coronated as the next prime minister of Canada. And how much of a threat is Pierre Poilievre to this great reset WEF globalist agenda? He appears to be a serious threat to it. He has promised that he will eliminate the carbon tax as his first order of business. But at the same time, you sometimes wonder, at least I do, when it comes to the political arena, am I looking at a professional wrestling match where you have a face and a heel and you have someone behind the scenes writing out the script and everyone's just playing their role? And I do genuinely think along those lines that, you had I remember back in the days, Hollywood Hulk Hogan, when he turned heel, and they had this NWO, and people started to like the heels. It kind of things got turned upside down because the heels became popular. Probably the most famous heel in wrestling was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was a heel, but then for whatever reason, I was never a huge fan of wrestling, but I watched it sometimes. And I know the characters. I know, obviously The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, and Stone Cold, and a few others. Hulk Hogan, certainly. Just the main ones. Anyway, just reading. Danny is writing that the Liberal Party is like a box of Christmas lights. Half don't work, and those that do are not that bright. I've never heard that line before, and I like it. I'm going to be using it, and I'm not giving attribution. I'm going to steal it. Uh, yeah, and Danny's writing that it's a selection, not an election. It's similar to what happened to Democrats in the United States when they went through their primary process. They chose, for good, bad, or otherwise, the choice of the Democratic Party was Joe Biden. They wanted him to carry the standard against Donald Trump. And then the party basically said, no, Joe, sorry. They pushed him out, and they turned to the Democratic DNC party members, those who had, nominated Biden. They said, you don't get to pick. We're choosing for you. We're going to you're stuck with Kamala Harris, whether you like it or not, because we're imposing her as the candidate for the DNC. And I think that was a huge wake-up call for a lot of American left-wing types who was like, wait a minute, I thought we were the Democratic Party, and here we're circumventing democracy and they're imposing the candidate on us. She ran against Joe Biden in the 2016 primaries and won zero delegates, none, goose egg. And now the senior apparatus of the DNC said we're installing her, and that was disgusting. But anyway, Cryptomeria has shown up. I don't even know. There's Cryptomeria. Danny's writing that Jon Stewart is fully scripted, as are all those kinds of show. Hello, teleprompter. Rehearsal. Yeah. The we get the so Danny is 100% bang on the money that these things are scripted. I have to wonder though, you got a guy like Joe Rogan who famously interviewed Donald Trump. But before that, he interviews everyone. He's the Johnny Carson of podcasters. He gets the biggest and best names. He gets the biggest stars in Hollywood: Jamie Foxx, Robert Downey Jr., from politics. He gets Robert Kennedy. He gets Trump. He gets the big names. And rather than like back in the days of the old Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where an individual would sit down, and Carson had politicians on as well. He had Ronald Reagan on a number of times. He had Bill Clinton on his show playing the saxophone. It was not, it wasn't as common as you see now in the podcasting world, but it did happen. And, but during the old Johnny Carson days, it would be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 20 at most. But now with podcasts, with guys like Joe Rogan and this PBD and others and Andrew Schultz, it gives politicians an opportunity to sit down for a casual, seemingly free flowing conversation that can go on an hour, two, sometimes 3 hours long. And I think that's amazing. And the degree to which you could script out 3 hours of, I don't think you could do it. I don't think you can do it. I think when Donald Trump sat down with Joe Rogan, I tend to think that was probably just free flowing conversation between Donald Trump and Joe Rogan, just wherever the conversation went. But that's my opinion. Anyway, Cryptomiri is saying that he doesn't watch them anymore. Colbert got weird, and I'm not into celebrity culture. Never could stand Colbert. Never. I don't think, I genuinely don't think the guy is that bright. To be that's my own honest opinion. I just think John Stewart, by contrast, at least I think that man, he's a good entertainer. And I do think he's quite bright. Colbert, I think, is an idiot. So, um, Danny saying the only one I liked was the Arsenio Hall show. And gosh, we're getting going back. As Johnny Carson was getting ready to leave the Tonight Show, there all of a sudden was an explosion of talk shows because everyone was looking to, they realized there was going to be a void because Carson ruled late night TV, taught the talk show format. And then there was the Arsenio Hall, there was Joan Rivers had one for a time, and a number of others started to try and fill that void that Johnny Carson was going to leave. And then I've got No Name writing about Tulsi Gabbard dismantled Kamala Live. I didn't see that one. There's so much out there, it's impossible to keep up with everything. Danny believes that Rogan is scripted, like PBD. I don't know. I don't know. I genuinely wonder to what degree things go viral organically and how often they're just pushed by media players, because there are algorithms out there that can ensure that specific content gets promoted and gets more exposure the same way back in the day, through payola, something called payola. They would take music and pump it out across the airwaves, and you ended up with some horrible songs like da da da, what you will and what you won't, and there's a horrible song that's still embedded into my subconscious mind, but it got heavy promotion. And I can think of tons of other songs like that, wasn't that people embraced it and said, wow, this is a great song, or was it just constant radio play, hypnopedia, embedding it into our subconscious? And I think there's a lot of the latter. No Name is writing, the midnight special was on after Johnny Friday nights at 1:30 a.m. You must be on the coast, I'm guessing. I remember the midnight special music show that would highlight the music of the day. And that, this is the machinery that they would use to promote. And, I remember being downtown Toronto, living at Pape Avenue, Pape and Cosburn. So right on the subway line. I was just east of the downtown, across the Don Valley River, across the Don Valley Valley, the Don Valley, that's what it was. Being across the river there. And so downtown. And there was the California Tavern was a pub I used to frequent. I was single, had my own apartment, living alone, had a cat. I was a cat man. And I went down to the California Tavern, and and the reason I did was because they had live music, and the amount of talent amazed me in a city the size of Toronto. The number of people who would come and play music there, and they often performed their own tunes, and they were as good as anything I heard on the radio, and yet and better than a lot of what I would hear on the radio, and yet they don't have the record deal. Why? Why? And I do think that the individuals who are able to succeed in the entertainment industry, broadly speaking, be that television, movies, acting, Netflix, music industry, whatever, the entertainment spectrum, I genuinely believe you pretty much have to sell your soul in order to be given the opportunity to put yourself out there. That's my honest to God opinion. Um, I've got whale oil writing that Phil Donahue was revealing some truths. He got the gag. I used to like Phil Donahue. He was funny. I did stand up comedy for a short time, and I used to have that as part of my quote, my act. I never got anywhere with my stand up comedy. The closest I got, I did get what they called yuck yucks. I was doing it at yuck yucks when I was in and around the age of 20, when I was in university around that time. And uh, you would do Monday nights at the Downtown Club, which was at Yorkville, just north of Bloor. They called that the Downtown Club. Then they had the Uptown Club at Yonge and Eglinton, and then they had a club on Queen Street East called the Studio. And Mondays was the Downtown at Yorkville. Tuesdays was Uptown at Yonge and Eglinton. Wednesdays was the Studio down on Queen Street East. And they charged it $1 because it was sponsored by Chum FM. It was called Young Comedy Night or something to that effect. And you would go up and you would do 7-8 minutes of your routine. And I did, after a really good night, I got a showcase where they picked a few, you probably had 40, 50 people performing regularly. And they would pick 8 or 9 and have a big night where they would have the managers of those 3 clubs as well as the Mississauga club. They grab a couple agent, Mark Breslin was there. And they did it on a Wednesday night at the Studio Club, which was the lowest of the 3. They would only get, usually Wednesday nights at the Studio, you get 15, 20 people. And anyway, that's a long digression, but I took my turn. I gave it a shot, and I went up on that night when I had a showcase, and I bombed. I completely bombed. I was horrible. And the reason I was horrible, a large part of the reason, is I got the showcase because what I started to do was to drink before going on stage. And that helped my nerves, that helped me loosen up, that helped me perform. And then I got the showcase. And a buddy of mine, Terry, at the time, said, "What are you going to do? You're going to be an alcoholic. What would happen?" I'll do a video on that one time about getting into the comedy thing from a guy who failed to do it. I wonder though if I'd gotten half cut, like was my normal routine. If I'd had a few pops before I went on stage, might I have done well? Perhaps. And then might I be an alcoholic now, suffering from cirrhosis of the liver? Who knows? Let me look and see what's being written. You just got me onto that because the night that I was picked to do the showcase was after I had done kind of an impression or referenced Phil Donahue. As someone in the audience while I was doing my routine started to interject to my routine. I was talking about, I was talking about suggestive selling at McDonald's and what a joke it was. Want fries with that? Do you want this with that? Do you want that with that? Just mick off and give me my McMeal. And someone in the audience said, I used to manage at McDonald's, and the reason we do suggestive selling, I said, lady, this ain't the, I dropped a lot of F bombs, everyone did. Yeah, this ain't the Phil Donahue show. If you want the Phil Donahue show, I'll give you the Phil Donahue show. And I wore glasses at the time, put on a big oversized pair of glasses that were my glasses that I never wear, and said, suggestive selling at McDonald's. Is it a problem? Is it not? And I went out into the audience and I stuck the mic in her face and she got all flustered and it went killed. And then I got called over to a guy named Larry Horowitz, who was the director of New Talent, and he said, "We want to have you at a showcase." And I was thinking, man, I'm going to be a star. I'm going to be famous. I was actually nervous and scared as all get out. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. Oh man, I'm changing it over from. I had it on. I'm just trying to catch up to what's been written. Midnight Special. I read that. Wolfman Jack. No Name is writing that George Carlin was. I'm assuming No Name. I'm going to assume you're male, so I'm going to say his. George Carlin was No Name's was his favorite, and Stephen Wright. I used to be somewhat students of them all. I loved George Carlin for his lists. He always liked to have a list of things. And Stephen Wright just was completely out there, stoner. Jesus forever. Amen, Danny. My feet would have never gotten back on the Christian path if that showcase had gone well and if I embarked on a career in comedy, although that would be, gosh, coming up on 40 years ago, but whatever the case. Every now and again, I have a thought of doing it again, as an old guy now and see what would happen. But I wouldn't drink because I don't drink anymore, hardly, just socially. Danny's a big Cat Williams fan. I'm not even familiar with Cat Williams. I don't know that name. And I have Momzilla saying subscribe back in the morning. Well, thank you, Momzilla. I haven't seen your name before, so just let me wrap it up because I've been going on for darn near close to an hour about this election that's coming up. I do have some predictions to make. Mark Carney, I've already made the prediction that Mark Carney is going to be coronated. I made that pretty much right after the leadership race was announced. Mark Carney's going to win. It's a coronation. And then what I believe will happen March 9th, or a day or so after, he will be installed as leader and as Prime Minister of Canada, leader of the Liberal Party, and he'll take over the Prime Minister's office. Parliament is prorogued until March 24th, meaning it's suspended. There's no legislative action taking place until March 24th. It would not surprise me if even before that date, that Mark Carney then goes to the Governor General and asks the Governor General to dissolve the legislature for the purpose of having a general election. And we could be at the polls in April or May, early June at the very latest. Holy cow. The number of people jumping on is jumping all over the place. It's gone over 30. It's right now at 16. It was at 25. You're welcome to fill the live chat. And then all bets are off in terms of the result of an election. Could Carney win? All depends how things go during the course of the election. I would expect to see a full court press by the media to get him elected and to do everything possible to ensure that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are not elected, whether it's scripted or otherwise. Pierre Poilievre has set a very high expectation with those of us on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, because he has announced that he, as pretty much his first order of business, would be to cancel the carbon tax and not replace it with something equally gouging, which is what Mark Carney and the Liberals are saying they're going to do. They're saying they're going to replace the carbon tax with another carbon tax, but one, rather than it being added directly onto the price of the things that we pay for, they'll bury it and it'll get buried into the price. They'll charge it to manufacturers, producers, the oil and gas industry, and then they can just build it into the price. That's the Carney liberal plan. Basically, Pierre Poilievre is talking about taking a scythe to the government, to the bureaucracy, to pay for his promises. And he's also intimated that he said there are only two genders. Pierre Poilievre was being interviewed by a left-wing podcaster, and he was being asked about gender ideology, and would he, like Trump has done, state that there are only two genders? And Pierre Poilievre, playing a little bit cute, said, "Well, are there others? Those are the only two I know of. It's the only two anyone knows of. There's male and female. You pick one of the two." Even when a child would be born with one of these rare intersex conditions like Swyer syndrome, which I mentioned before, the parents would be told, your child's a boy or a girl. There's no in between. But anyway, I've got David F. Saying Trump will not impose tariffs to shut down the Liberals' Team Canada. See, you brought up a very important component, and that is a large part of the Canadian identity revolves around the fact, what does it mean to be Canadian? People will say, well, we're not Americans. We define ourselves a lot of times by what we are not by what we are. And this animosity that is being fomented between Canadians and Americans, it's being fomented by the liberal left media in Canada. They're trying to create animosity between Americans and Canadians. They're trying to drive it. And what's happening is it is helping liberal fortunes in this country. It is this rise in nationalism is being pushed on us by the liberal left media, by the CBCs of the world, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and that goes a long way. That's what's been pushing up liberal fortunes and getting them up in and around 30%, because people are leaving the Greens, they're leaving the NDP, they're leaving the Bloc Québécois in Quebec, and they're galvanizing around the Liberal Party, because you see this guy, Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, former advisor, pushing all this climate change garbage at the UN. And they say, wow, I wasn't too sure about Poilievre, and here's an alternative. And so all bets are off. I do not have a prediction on the outcome of an election where it's basically Pierre Poilievre against Mark Carney. I do not have a prediction at this point. I may in the future, as things sort out, as I see how Poilievre and Mark Carney perform. But at this juncture, I am not going to say it's an impossibility that the Liberals could win re-election, either minority or majority. I think a minority outcome is more likely, but I think it's even possible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think the potential is there that the Liberals under Mark Carney could win a minority and maybe even a majority. I don't know. We got to see how the election unfolds and how their messages, how the programming works. Does the programming work? A lot of Canadians, we were programmed to be scared to death of the deadly coronavirus. But as we saw, millions of Canadians refused the COVID jabs despite all the programming. And then you had the Ottawa convoy protests when thousands of people were descending on Ottawa, especially on the weekends, and protesting the Trudeau and his liberal cronies wiping their backsides with our Canadian Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms and treating it like toilet paper. And a lot, not all, but a lot of Canadians got pushed back. And we got to push even harder. Danny's writing, look up Cat Williams. I think you will like his stand-up. Okay, I'd assume Cat was a woman. I work with a Kathleen who goes by Cat. Cat Williams. I will look it up. I do enjoy stand up. So, no Name is writing. Pierre Poilievre will be playing defense with a 4-goal lead going into the third. That's a good way of. That's a good analogy. It's a very good analogy. No Name, because he is still punching up around 40, in and around the 40% mark, which puts the Conservatives in majority territory. But that's right now. That is right now. And the Liberals have come up from 20, from being risking being completely decimated. There was even speculation that in an election, if an election was held with Trudeau running the party, that they could lose official party status. Now they've gone all the way up to 30, and it must be remembered that in the last two federal elections in 2019 and 2021, that the Trudeau-led Liberals only got about 32% of the popular vote. So they're up to what won them the last two elections and everyone's assuming it's going to be Mark Carney at the helm. Danny's writing, I am a Canadian who was born and lives in Montreal, Quebec. Not a Quebecer. I am Canadian first. Pas de trouble, mon ami. Canada is, as a country, if anyone's watching this from the States, Canada is a country, we have two official languages, English, French. However, every province in Canada also has an official language. And in Quebec, the only official language is Français, French. Every other province in Canada has English as its official language, except for the province of New Brunswick. And New Brunswick is the only officially bilingual province in this country. And if you go to New Brunswick, you will see that it is their version of the French language is totally Fringlish, franglais. Jette ton stuff dans mon car, on va driver sur la road. They parlay French and Anglais at the même time. And I love going to New Brunswick because New Brunswick, I find I never have any problem because sometimes when I'm speaking French, I will forget a French word. I'm bilingual, but I sometimes my French vocabulary isn't as good as my English. So when I forget a word in English, or rather in French, si je jase avec quelqu'un en Edmonton ou n'importe où dans la province du Nouveau-Brunswick, si je m'oublie un mot en anglais, en français, il faut juste laisser tomber l'anglicisme. C'est good to go. Pas de trouble. So say good to go. It's good to go. Anyway, whale oil beef. Whale oil beef is being a smart, you know what? When was the War of 1812? No worries, whale oil. It's like the Christmas asking, when is midnight? What time is midnight mass? Geez, that's a good question. I've got V Hope writing. McCarney, McCarney will only be PM for a week or so till government falls. My prediction, we'll see if it comes true. Thank you for chiming in, V Hope, or V. I think your name is just V. And I think you're writing Hope McCarney will only be at PM for a week or so. That's somewhat what I think, but I don't think the government will fall. I think what will happen is probably maybe even before Parliament meets again, even before they go back in session after proroguing ends on March 24. I think that Mark Carney will be going to the Governor General and asking that the legislature, that the House of Commons be dissolved for the purpose of having an election. That's what I expect to happen. And I see that if I'm a political advisor to the Liberal Party, that's what I'm going to tell them to do, because then they are going to the electorate on their own terms rather than having been defeated by a motion of no confidence. And then Mark Carney gets to run on what I'm going to do, not anything that I have done. He never has to face the scrutiny, or he never has to face question period. He never has to have his feet held to the fire. And so, it's deceptive. In my view, it's deceptive. It's dishonest. But that's politics. And in politics, you do whatever you can to win. Anyway, I've got Danny writing in New Brunswick. You have to learn Chiac. That's what they call the French spoken. Well, there's Acadien, and then when you get down to Shediac, they call it Chiac. And it actually sounds like French spoken with an English accent with lots of English words thrown in. Chiac is something else. I didn't work with a woman when I was at Belcartier in the army, posted to Belcartier, Quebec, right near Quebec City. Courcelette. Um, anyway, at the Tim Hortons, there was a woman from New Brunswick working there, and she spoke. Elle a parlé français tellement avec un accent anglophone. Et je suis y allé pour commander mon café. Je dis un foncé avec deux crèmes et un édulcorant, s'il te plaît. And she's like, pas de trouble. Est-ce que tu veux une baigne avec ça? And I went, hey, if you're English, I speak English. I'm an Anglophone. She goes, and she didn't understand me. Chiac is a different animal. Danny wants, now we're getting into the bad jokes. What color was Napoleon's white horse? I think it was brown. Uh, Brett saying props to being bilingual. When you live in an area, Brett's all the way out in Wyoming. When you live, 2011 till 2015, I spent living in Quebec City, which is, you might as well live in France. I mean, it is all French. And so, and I was in the army and I was the only Anglophone in my unit. So, osmosis, you take it in, sink or swim. And I'm not one who's into sinking, I'd rather swim. Whale Oil Beef is writing, I suspect that Gordon is not on live chat and missed the earlier 1812 comment. Did you write when was the War of 1812? Yeah, I am on live chat, but sometimes it can be hard to keep up. I'll look back for it later. I've got V writing, don't think of that, didn't think of that, makes sense. Yeah, we'll see. That's why I like having this channel. I get ideas, I get to share my ideas. I'm a 58-year-old political junkie all my life, and it's because my mother in particular was very politically motivated. And for those of you who are new here, and I see I have a number of people who are here, I am a Canadian, born in 1966 in the little town of Port Colborne, Ontario, Canada, near Niagara Falls. But I was less than a year old, and we moved to New York City. And I lived in New York City until I was 4. And then we moved and spent a few months living in Etobicoke before my dad got shipped back or sent back to the US, to New York City. He worked in the financial industry, he worked on Wall Street. And we were back in he was back working in New York, but when we moved back, we moved to New Jersey. And I lived in New Jersey for kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3. And then I started grade 4. And it was during my grade 4 year that we moved back to Canada. Lived in Canada for a year and a half, finished grade 4, did all of grade 5. Then we moved to Portland, Oregon. I lived in Portland, Oregon, 1977. I spent a year there, grade 6. I was 11, 12. Then we moved back to Canada. Pickering, Ontario, Canada, on the on the eastern edge of the Greater Toronto Area. Lived there for that. From then on, I've always had a Canadian address. Went down to the States a number of times, so I have something. We all have a unique perspective, and that's mine. Even when we were living in the United States, my mother was very dialed in to the American political scene, and she kept an eye on the Canadian political scene. She liked to know what was going on in Canada. She bemoaned the fact that when Trudeau came to become Prime Minister of Canada in 1968, and we had Trudeau mania in this country. Trudeau was seen as and he was a charismatic guy. I never thought he was that good looking, but I mean, Mick Jagger was also something of a sex symbol, and I always thought he was ugly as sin, but who cares? And Trudeau was very popular, Trudeau mania, but we were living in the United States at the time. We were living in New York City when Trudeau mania took over, and my mom kind of missed not being able to experience Trudeau mania. We lived down in New Jersey during the Watergate period with Richard Nixon. And I was in grade one, actually, in the 1972 US presidential election. And my school, Clara E. Coleman in Glen Rock, New Jersey, had a straw vote where the students got to vote for either George McGovern and the Democrats or Richard Nixon and the Republicans. And I came home from school that day, and my mom asked me, typical question, how was school? What did you do? And I said, oh, 6-year-old kid. I go, we had the election. My mom said, really? You voted? Yes. Who did you vote for? And I said very proudly, I voted for Nixon. And my mom just about lost it. Couldn't believe I voted for Nixon. I said, everyone voted for Nixon, and everyone did. Look at the results of that 1972 election. I think Nixon won every state but two, but that's easy to do when you break into the Democratic National Committee's headquarters, their main office in the Watergate Hotel, and know exactly how they're planning to conduct their campaign. Makes it easy to win the election. Anyway, so that's kind of my perspective. And then we moved back to Canada when I was, turning 12. And we walked right into that election, 1979 election, when Trudeau and the Liberals lost to Joe Clark and the Conservatives. And my mom signed me up. I was a Liberal Party member the day I turned 14. And I was campaigning for the Liberals, the Liberal candidate Norm Catholic, in what at that time was called Ontario riding. Yada yada yada. I'm rambling on. I got Danny writing, Je suis perfectly bilingue. Je speak anglais et French. LMFAO. Yeah, that's friendly. There are a lot of guys who do this online. They parley français and English at the même time, but it only resonates with people if you're bilingual to begin with, because you have to do mental gymnastics. Scribbly Doodle is here. I got a lot of new people saying same party, same problems. Yeah. Whether it's Mark Carney's Liberals or Justin Trudeau's Liberals, we're going to be looking at the same ideology, same woke left liberal ideology. We're going to look at what they call quantitative easing, which just means print more money. Mark Carney was huge on that as governor of the Bank of England. He's big on just printing more money, which is inflationary. But whatever, they rather than saying printing more money, they put quantitative easing. Quantitative easing. George Carlin would rip that apart. He would dissect that euphemistic language brilliantly. Quantitative easing. What the hell is that? Quantitative easing. And then he would say, it sounds like, and he'd think of something. I'll think of something. I'll try and do a George Carlin type routine. Anyway, Haya is writing, what is deceptive? I was talking about the fact that Mark Carney, before going to the electorate, when he becomes Prime Minister of Canada, when he becomes leader of the Liberal Party and becomes Prime Minister of Canada, I think he should be forced, prior to going to an election, to face question period, to sit in the House of Commons. But I'm telling you right now, he is going to call an election before that. And I view that as being deceptive. He's running a shadow campaign right now. He should be out on the hustings. He should be doing town halls. He should be introducing himself to Canadians, not going on. You want to go on the Jon Stewart show? Fine. You want to be on the Daily Show on Comedy Central? Okay, whatever. But you should also be on Canadian talk shows, on Canadian radio. And he's running very much a shadow campaign. Why? Because this is not a campaign. This is just a coronation. The Liberals are going to hand it to him on a silver platter in similar fashion to the way that Kamala Harris was thrust upon Americans. They didn't, Democratic, she wasn't nominated in their primary process. They picked Joe Biden. And so rather than truncating and giving a short little race and letting the voters decide who they want as Democratic candidate, they just force them to take Kamala Harris. And that's what's happening with the Liberals. Liberals are only 300,000 party members, give or take. And these are the individuals who are going to decide who the next prime minister of Canada is. And to have a Liberal Party membership, you only have to be 14 years of age. And the voting process is not overseen by Elections Canada. It's run in-house by the Liberal Canada, Liberal Party of Canada. The Liberal Party of Canada is overseeing the process by which this country chooses its next prime minister. And that ain't right. Anyway, I've got the Nazneen. I'm a Canadian born and raised in Alberta, and this whole thing is showing how narcissistic Smith really is. You're talking about Danielle Smith, Premier of Alberta. I haven't even mentioned her. Hope her and the UCP, United Conservative Party of Alberta. I'm in Ontario, by the way, just a political junkie, that's all. Hope her and the UCP corruption is now being investigated. Canada First, Smith is Maple MAGA. I haven't, I can't even say your name, the Naz9, whatever it is. I haven't commented one iota on Alberta politics and about what's going on with, yeah, she's come under accusations that Alberta Health Services procurement or something like that there have been some shady dealings going on. She's denied anything and is calling for a full investigation, going to let that play out. But I'll tell you something, as a Eastern Canadian, Ontario, I appreciate the job that Danielle Smith has done. I think she's a large part of the reason why Donald Trump paused the 30-day pause on the imposition of tariffs. And I'm impressed. I'm here to say I disagree with you. I am impressed with Danielle Smith. But with that being said, fair game. We live in a free and democratic society. You're certainly entitled to express your opinion. And she's not above criticism. Nobody's perfect, obviously. There is no perfection. Anyway, going on with the comments. Danny's writing, thank God for Smith. We need a premier like that in Quebec. Screw Francois Legault, who is the premier of Quebec. What do they call that party now? Action. What are they called? I forgot now. What Francois Legault's party is called. And I used to live in Quebec. And it was on the ballot when I was voting in Quebec. And I can't remember. I can't even remember. Someone's going to write it. Whale Oil Beef is bringing something up from a long time ago. The Fuddle-Duddle incident in Canadian political history occurred in February 16 of 1991. Pierre Elliott Trudeau was accused of having uttered the F-bomb in Parliament, in the House of Commons, and later with reporters, they asked him what he had said, and he said, I said fuddle-duddle. And everyone knows what he said. No Name is writing that Nixon, Richard Milhouse Nixon, was on Laugh-In, a hugely popular comedy show, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, in the late 60s, early 70s. They had everyone on that show, and it was very political. Brett Skinner thinks I'm blessed with the memory I have. Blessed and cursed. Genuinely, I do have a good memory. I'm able to recall things fairly well. I think my memory is almost, I think the word is indentic or something like that. It's a fancy way of saying photographic. I'm not a photographic memory at all, but it is, I think it's better than average. I don't like to engage in false modesty. I think I've got a pretty darn good memory. And praise be to, did I work at it? No, it's a gift from God. Danny's writing, that's what I said earlier. Different leader, same same stuff, to be polite. And Danny's saying that Smith negotiated a 10% rather than a 25% tariff on oil. CAC, thank you. Coalition Avenir de Québec. Francois Legault's party. I can't believe I couldn't remember that. So much for my memory. No, I thought it was Coalition Avenir, future. the Coalition for the Future of Quebec. I don't think it's Coalition Action, Coalition Avenir. Check that out. And Danny says he is quasi photographic. There's the word, no names writing, eidectic. Memory is the ability to recall images, sounds, or events with great accuracy and detail, usually after seeing them only once. And Danny suggests I'm right. It's Coalition Avenir de Québec, les caquistes. It sounds gross. Cac sounds like caca, which is a French word also. Then we in English will talk about caca. Well, that's actually caca, French, is from whence it originates. Anyway, I've gone on much longer than I planned to. I'm like a pastor at church. How many, anyone who goes to church, any Christians out there, you probably heard the pastor, the priest, the minister, whatever, the faith leader saying, in summation, and there's kind of a collective sigh that goes up from the congregation. Oh, good, it's wrapping up. And then 10 minutes later, they'll say, my final point, and you'll be like, oh, just final point. You said you were wrapping up, and then all right, and to finally put a bow on things, and you're like, oh, come on. And I'm like that, guilty as charged. I've got LJ now writing thoughts on a portion of resources being nationalized as a means of lowering taxes while keeping service funds. It's an idea. Unfortunately, I don't think it's feasible. I don't think the corporate interests that really, genuinely, truly run everything behind the curtain, figuratively speaking, would ever cede ownership. I could go through a lot of historical examples where governments have gone in and tried to nationalize resources in an effort to look up Mossadegh, who was back in the 1950s, democratically elected president of Iran. And Mossadegh did go ahead and nationalized all of Iran's oil fields. And I'll leave it there. Read up on what happened to him. Mossadegh was replaced with the Shah of Iran. So, thoughts on nationalizing? That would be good, but I don't think it's a realistic expectation. I've got a lot of new people watching me right now, and I appreciate everyone who came on. I'm going to invite you, especially if you made it to the 122-minute mark. And if you're not subscribed, a guy like me, any YouTuber, which is what I guess I am, YouTubers, it's a competitive space in that we're all basically trying to do the same thing, at least in terms of my station where I'm injecting political commentary, my thoughts, views, and opinions, being something of the poster child for cancel culture because I tick all the boxes. I'm white, I'm male, I'm Christian, I'm straight, I'm all these things. And in this political climate we're in, especially in Canada, much less so in the United States now with Donald Trump, there's a tendency to say your voice, because it's a voice that is expressing ideas from the perspective of a white, male, Christian, straight guy, that you don't get a spot. You're not allowed to inject your voice into the public marketplace. You shut up and be quiet, boomer. We've got to allow, we need Aboriginal female homosexual voices who are gender confused throwing their thoughts out there, not you. I think that what needs to happen in the public marketplace is that we have to divorce opinions, thoughts, ideas from the source. Let's just examine the idea, blind to where it came from, and discuss it on its merits. And that is a difficult thing to do. And so it helps me get my voice out there when I get likes. That apparently, the way I understand it, it helps your videos move up in the feed, so to speak, so that people seeking things out, they might get a chance to see your content. And likewise, subscriptions. The more people subscribe to a particular channel, the more subscriptions you get, the more exposure you get. And I'm at 1,100, somewhere around 1,100 subscribers. I'd love to have it more. I am monetized now, but I do not ask for any money. The way I looked at it for a long time, I didn't monetize, meaning there were never any ads on any of my videos. But the way I look at it is that YouTube, I do have individuals coming to my station to to participate in these live discussions, live videos. And I'm sure a lot will stay on YouTube after that. They'll see a video and they'll go, oh, this looks interesting. This looks like something I might, and they'll consume more content, which is how YouTube generates its own revenue. And I'm like, well, if a few nickels and dimes fall into my hand, why not? So, but I don't, there's no subscription. There's no members get special benefits or anything like that. That I will never do. But at any rate, um, so I appreciate likes, subscriptions, and obviously shares as well. If I was shy, I wouldn't do this. And I also like to mention the fact that I am a Bible believing, something of an evangelical Christian, although I'm not big on labels. You know, what kind of Christian are you? Are you fundamentalist? Are you born again? Are you evangelical? I believe in the wisdom that is contained within this collection of books. This is one of my, I have several Bibles. This was a Bible I got in university, the new Oxford Annotated Bible. But um, I'm sure there's a newer version out now. The publishing industry in university, the academic press, is almost a scam because they update everything to force students to buy the newest copy, change the chapters and page numbers around so that if you want to, they want to kill the resale market for textbooks because university professors, ka-ching, 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 every time a book in which they have material printed is sold, they get their royalties. Anyway, I'm just going to read up the last few, and then what I like to do when I end my videos is I give a blessing. It's not my blessing. This is a blessing that was given to Moses to give to Aaron, and Aaron was to speak it over God's covenant chosen people. This is after the Exodus out of Egypt. But just going to read off the last few things. Whale urine, whale oil beef is in rare form today. He's writing, if you can recall the word Alzheimer's, you're good to go. It's a good joke. What's that term again for losing your memory? I can't seem to. Alzheimer's. Yeah, that's it. And amen, amen. Looks like I've caught up on everything that was written. Miss Hellraiser has liked the video already. I say I have 14. Thank you very much, everyone. And I'll ask you, even if you're not a Christian, and especially if you're not a Christian, because I recognize the fact that in the culture of today, we've been programmed, we've been told, we've been instructed to view this book as having little to no value. We've been taught, conditioned, programmed to look on the Bible in a very shallow fashion with no real depth and to just dismiss it out of hand, and that's intentional. So especially if you're not a Christian, I'll ask you to receive these words, again, words that were spoken over the Israelite people after they had exited the Exodus from slavery in Egypt. And the words were these: the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And the point I like to make is that at the end of that blessing is that this world is crazy right now. The political situation in Canada, yeah, it's crazy. The tsunami that may be coming in the Caribbean Sea with this 7.6 magnitude earthquake in the Caribbean Sea. We've got Santorini and the Aegean Islands off the coast of Greece. There's been they're calling it a earthquake earthquake swarm or cluster. They've had hundreds of earthquakes there in a very seismic, um, a very active area for this type of seismic activity. And then we've had another plane crash in Alaska, 10 people killed. We got the situation in Israel, which is a particular focus of mine. And I'm very much supportive of Israel. We got a lot going on in this world. And if you can get into a relationship with Jesus Christ, it'll bring peace, it'll bring comfort, and believe it or not, you'll find joy in it. But I'll leave that there. It's an offer. And I'll see y'all tomorrow night. I'm probably going to do another one tomorrow night. And no name, glad you enjoyed the chat. We'll talk to you all again soon. God bless all. Good night.